Hello everyone, welcome to week 16 lecture 2. In this lecture we will be discussing about the ecosystem ecology, interactions and energy flow in an ecosystem. By definition, ecosystem ecology is the study of interaction between living organisms and the physical environment around them. Living organisms constitute all the biotic factors in an area and physical environment constitutes the abiotic factors. Ecosystem ecology helps in understanding the energy flow and nutrient recycling in particular ecosystem and in predicting ecosystems response to the changes in the environment or climate. The key concepts in today's discussion will include producers, consumers, decomposers, and biotic factors. Let's first look at the levels of organization in an ecosystem. The most basic unit of an ecosystem is an organism. For example, here we are talking about one fish. All the fish living in one pond makes the population or the number of individuals of this fish population. Different populations come together and make a community. The population of snake, population of plant, population of other microorganisms or other aquatic animals living in one pond. Ecosystem will constitute the living as well as non-living factors in one geographic area. And biosphere is the sum total of all the different kinds of ecosystems, the ecosystem of a forest, of a pond, of a lake, of a city, together make one biosphere. As briefly mentioned earlier, components of ecosystem are biotic factors and abiotic factors. Biotic factors includes producers, the organisms that make their own food, for example plant and alga. Consumers or heterotrophs are the organisms which rely on external sources for their food requirement. For example, herbivores that feed on plants, carnivores that feed on other animals, and omnivores that can eat both plants and animals. Decomposers are the organisms which decompose the dead or decayed material in their environment and act as a cleaners of the environment. For example, fungi and bacteria. The abiotic factors of an ecosystem includes all the physical factors, for example, climate, water, soil, light, and nutrients. So all the living things fall under biotic factors and all non-living things fall under abiotic factors. Ecosystem is a dynamic system in which the energy flows from one level to another. The first and primary most source of energy is sun. The sun's energy is converted into chemical energy by the plants. So plants are the primary producers. They make their own food and they are also called the autotrophs because they can prepare their own food. The primary consumers are herbivores. Consumers are everything that depends on the other organisms for their food requirement, which may include primary consumers, secondary consumers, and the important thing is they are also called autotrophs. So primary consumers are herbivores which feed on plants. Secondary consumers are the carnivores which feed on the primary consumers, and tertiary consumers are other levels of predators. If there are other organisms that eat the secondary consumer, they become the tertiary consumers. And finally, we have decomposers that can decompose everything, all the dead and decayed material around them, and they help in recycling the nutrients. At every stage of this energy flow, there is about 10% loss of energy. So food chain is the linear sequence of energy transfer which goes, for example, from grass to rabbit because rabbit eats grass, then fox eats rabbit, and then hog eats fox. The food web or the actual or the real scenario of this energy exchange is much more complex, and it ends up making a web. For example, here we look at the grass, which can be eaten up by a rabbit or by a mouse or by a grasshopper. This grasshopper can be eaten by a frog or a bird, and then bird is eaten up by snake. The frog is also eaten up by a snake. Frog can also be eaten up by owl. Owl can also eat a mouse, and then a mouse can also be eaten by a hawk or a fox, and then fox can also eat a rabbit. And finally we see that hawk is on the top, where it is able to eat several other secondary consumers. Different nutrients cycle through the ecosystem. Let's first look at the cycling of carbon. The carbon is fixed in the plants from carbon dioxide in the process of photosynthesis, and plants make food in the process of photosynthesis. That food is eaten up by the consumers, and it is converted into energy, as we have seen in the process of metabolism of glucose. Then the carbon in these organisms, which has been fixed in the form of body components, is decomposed, and carbon finally becomes the fossil fuel. When we burn the fossil fuel, again carbon dioxide is produced and the carbon recycles. If we talk about the nitrogen recycling, it starts by trapping or fixing the atmospheric nitrogen by the nitrogen fixing organisms in the ecosystem. This nitrogen is assimilated into the body, and finally denitrification sends back the nitrogen into the environment. For example, when we eat food or proteins, we produce urea. Some organisms produce ammonia or uric acid. That is how nitrogen gets back into the environment in the process of excretion or elimination. Now let's discuss water cycle. Water is present in several water bodies like oceans, lakes, ponds. It gets evaporated from there. As the water vapors rise up, they condense to form clouds. Then cloud undergo precipitation in the form of rain, and the rainwater is returned into the water bodies again. This water cycle is important for keeping the land wet and provide a source of nourishment for the plants. There are two major types of ecosystems: terrestrial ecosystem and aquatic ecosystem. Terrestrial ecosystem includes forests, grassland, deserts, tundra, example tropical rainforest with a high biodiversity. Aquatic includes freshwater like rivers and lakes, and marine like oceans or coral reefs. And the common example is coral reef diversity. Now, we have discussed before that ecosystem is a system in which energy flow takes place. The solar energy is converted into chemical energy by plants, and that energy in the form of food is taken up by other animals. Now let's look at the gross primary productivity and net primary productivity of an ecosystem. Gross primary productivity is the total energy captured by all the producers that perform photosynthesis. But if you remove the amount that is used in respiration by other animals, then the remaining energy, which is now fixed in the form of food in plants, will be the net primary productivity. So the net primary productivity will be gross productivity minus respiration rate. So it's easy to understand that the rainforests in which there are more plants and less consumers, they would have more net productivity because the respiration rate performed by the animals is less. And the deserts would have low net productivity because there are less number of plants and probably more number of animals in deserts. Now let's look at the impact of human beings on the ecosystem. Human beings have been involved in habitat destruction through deforestation and urbanization. They also cause pollution such as air pollution, water pollution, and soil contamination. Human beings have also significantly contributed to the climate change, which has altered the weather patterns and ecosystem disruption. And human beings have also overexploited several resources through overfishing, hunting, and extracting natural resources. Ecosystem provides us several services, such as provisioning service in the form of food, water, and several sources of medicine. Regulating services because the ecosystem is able to maintain climate and water purification. Supporting services such as nutrient recycling and soil formation, and cultural services such as providing us the opportunity for recreation and spiritual values. Now let's look at the case study of coral reef ecosystem. Coral reefs are important because they have high biodiversity, they are attractive for tourism, and they also provide coastal protection. These coral reefs have been threatened because of the coral bleaching, because of climate change and overfishing. Several conservation efforts have been made for protection of these coral reefs in the form of marine protected areas or restoration projects. Conservation involves the protection of ecosystems and biodiversity, for example, setting up of national parks and wildlife reserves. Restoration means rebuilding damaged ecosystem, for example, wetland restoration projects. To summarize, ecosystem ecology explores interaction and processes like energy flow and nutrient cycling. Ecosystem is essential for us because it provides several essential services, but it faces the threat from human activities. Therefore, it's our responsibility to be involved in conservation strategies and use of sustainable practices for preserving our ecosystem.